So good morning. Welcome to the Bay Area Lecture Series. I just want to do a quick reminder. The goals of this series are twofold. One is to highlight local clinicians, researchers, advocates, and policymakers, but also just as importantly, to explore how issues of structural bias and social justice cut across systems of care. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce to you Dina Tyler. Dina is a founding member of the Oakland Prevention, Recovery, and Early Psychosis, or PrEP team. That's how I met her. She's also a co-founder of the Bay Area Mandala Project and the Bay Area Hearing Voices Network. When I first met Dina at Oakland Prep, she immediately stood out to me for her enthusiasm and positive regard for all, but more importantly, her ability to smoothly move between intersubjective dyadic perspectives and logical, incisive arguments for system change. The only other thing I will say in introduction is just to remind us, pertinent to the topic of this talk, that despite the best data we have, recovery rates for people with schizophrenia have not improved since the 1950s. So welcome, Dina. I look forward to what you have to say. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And thank you so much, Damien and Gina, for inviting me. It's really an honor. And I appreciate you, Damien, for your open-mindedness and your dedication to improving treatment for people. I think I am the first person with lived experience to speak at the UCSF Grand Rounds. It's an honor, if not a bit uncomfortable, because of the big question mark. Can a psych survivor like me have an impact on a room full of psychiatrists? Especially around the topic of critical psychiatry. I struggled with whether I should try to fit myself into your world and the Grand Rounds talks that you're used to, but that's not really the point here. It's to try to bring you into my world, into my perspective. And even if I don't, or I end up looking like the fool, I am grateful for the opportunity to try. So I'm going to take about 55 minutes to present and then give some time for questions. I'm also happy for any follow-up questions. You can just go to dinatyler.com and email me there. It's not my first time speaking at a Grand Rounds. The first time I was actually a patient at the UCSD Outpatient Mental Health Clinic, the Gifford Clinic. And I was trying to demand that my treatment team remove my diagnoses. I was very vocal about my disagreement. And so they said I could come to Grand Rounds and plead my case. But I'll circle back to this later. I have been given 6 different diagnoses in my life. I have been hospitalized involuntarily. I've been prescribed so many different psychiatric drugs, and at one point was even on a cocktail of 7 meds. 5 psych drugs plus 2 others for the side effects caused by the other 5. When the doctors started discussing whether I had schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, I started to see things were not headed in a good direction for my life, and I decided to make my exit from the mental health system. I still have experiences that would be labeled as psychosis. But today I am a counselor with individual and family clients from around the world. I've also consulted with psychiatrists and psychologists, have done trainings for clinicians, nurses, and doctors, as well as working in San Francisco, Alameda, and San Mateo counties, developing and supervising a few different peer specialist programs. I don't take medication and haven't taken medication for 19 years. I graduated UC Berkeley with highest honors. I won the Peer Specialist of the Year Award in 2015 from the National Council for Behavioral Health. I've been working with the MAD movement of psychiatric survivor advocates and critical psychiatry movements for more than 15 years, and was a founder of Bay Area Hearing Voices, Bay Area Mandala Project, organizer of MAD Camp, and these are just a few of the projects I have been involved in. I also offer breathwork sessions and retreats for providers and family members who want to better understand how to hold space for psychosis. I have been on all sides of the psychiatric system. and am friends with so many people who work in this system. And I personally know how many caring, incredible people have taken out huge student loans because they truly want to help people through this profession. My talk today is pointing out the problems with the design, not the people. I was and still would be non-compliant. I've spent my life creating compassionate alternatives to the traditional mental health system because my hospitalization was really bad. I would never, ever want to seek help in a psychiatric hospital ever again. I've seen over and over that what happened to me happens again and again and is completely normal and common. Even today, right now, there are people being traumatized in psychiatric hospitals right here in the Bay Area. I know because I've talked with many patients, families, and advocates in the area for years. So this isn't just a Dina Tyler story. This isn't just a plea from my perspective. This is a story of many, many patients and the perspective of an international movement of patients, families, clinicians, researchers, legal advocates, and disability rights activists. This is a story of normalized violence and human rights violations, and a plea for how we can all choose to no longer participate in it. While I will not go into graphic detail, I will be addressing some things in my talk today about sexual assault and trauma. I realize not everyone chooses to hear things that could be potentially triggering. And you do have a choice here to leave or listen to this talk at a future time when you feel ready. However, I also want to invite all those that are in the mental health profession to deeply work on what triggers you in order to be the ones who can really hold hearing the traumatic experiences of those you encounter. If something I talk about today is upsetting to you, please take extra attention to nurture yourself and hold that part of you with a lot of compassion for the wound that is there. To understand my perspective, there are a few things about my life that are important to see the bigger picture. And while there are so many parts of my story to share, and you can find more on my website or just email me to ask, I specifically want to focus today on what might make someone non-compliant or reluctant to seek traditional mental health services. And I will use my own story as an example. I've heard voices and seen visions ever since I was a young child. A lot of times the voices are a relentless chatter of conversations, like being in the middle of a busy restaurant. I've had a few voices that terrify me with their criticisms and yelling. But I've also had voices that were super helpful and give me reminders and guidance and truly helped me get to where I am today. In school, sometimes the voices would help me out on tests, but they also made it hard to concentrate. I didn't tell any teachers about hearing voices because back then I didn't think it was abnormal. But since I had issues with concentration, in high school, I was diagnosed with attention deficit disorder and prescribed stimulants. The stimulants affected my sleep and appetite, where I felt I needed less of both. I began having a difficult time during my first 2 years of college and started having panic attacks and was crying a lot. I was diagnosed with severe depression and anxiety and started on a journey of different benzodiazepines and antidepressants while maintained on Adderall. Right before I started my 3rd year as an undergraduate transfer to UC Berkeley, while couch surfing and trying to find my own apartment, I was drugged with Rohypnol and raped. I did not have anyone I could process this with, and instead tried to bury it while I started my rigorous academic schedule. By my 2nd semester, I was lost in disturbing and overwhelming voices and would slip into periods of dissociation. I was seeing visions of an eco-apocalyptic future world where inflation was out of control, gas prices were soaring, people couldn't travel very far by car, and so motorcycles were economically valuable. In this vision, I'm riding on the back of a motorcycle, really scared while people are trying to pull me off and steal the bike. I was horrified by the look in their eyes when a human has lost their humanity to the point that they care more about an object than a human life. This vision deeply affected me. I wasn't bathing, eating, and was falling behind in my classes. Even though I had never learned how to ride a bicycle, I bought a Vespa. It didn't make much sense to my parents. And my mom drove up from San Diego and had me withdraw from school on medical leave. I was diagnosed with psychosis NOS, not otherwise specified, and put on antipsychotics. I returned home to San Diego, and my parents put me in a partial hospitalization program. In the year leading up to this, I had felt there would be an attack in New York on Y2K, and that I needed to convince everyone I knew to stay out of New York on New Year's Eve. This was fueled by Nostradamus predictions I encountered as a child. I was convinced that in order to avoid the horrific future I had seen in my visions, George Bush could not be elected in the year 2000, and I instead needed to get everyone I knew to vote for Nader. Y2K came and went, and there was no attack. In the months that followed, I adjusted to the idea that I was wrong. But I also felt a bit baffled. I was so wrong that now I was actually seen as psychotic, seriously mentally ill. I lost countless friends because of stigma, and my family members all treated me differently. Embarrassed, ashamed, and kind of hopeless, I decided my antidepressant Effexor wasn't helping me feel better, so I stopped it cold turkey. Less than 2 weeks later, I started feeling better, a whole lot better. I was having vivid dreams and dreamt about getting tattoos on my arms and woke up the next day and got them. I was feeling inspired and hopeful and creative. It also became harder to fall asleep. The withdrawal of Effexor triggered insomnia, and I was up for 5 days straight. On that 5th day of not sleeping, I had a profound experience. I discovered the meaning of life. I joined philosophers, poets, psychologists, writers, thinkers from history in asking the big questions of existence and coming up with an answer that made sense to me. Like an Old Testament prophet, I was speaking to what I called celestial beings and being given messages from a higher consciousness. These beings were watching what was happening amongst humans on this planet, and they had some very important things about our existence they wanted me to communicate. Like poets, philosophers, prophets, and religious leaders throughout time, I passionately followed this destiny. So on the 5th day without sleep, I started calling everyone I knew and told them I had discovered the meaning of life. I was sharing what I thought was the very clear pathway for humans that I was given. Part of that vision was that I would become the first female president of the United States, where in the future I would run against Chelsea Clinton, but that I would win. Now, this was back in the year 2000, way before Hillary ever ran for president. And to everyone else, I was just this shy, awkward goth girl who worked at a record store. I was nowhere near the person you see standing before you today. I had always been an extremely quiet person, not a hint of the ideal presidential candidate. But suddenly, I was animated, expressive, broke out of my shell, and was saying a lot. So to those around me, I was not acting normal. I just shifted out of my familiar personality and started acting in a really animated way. Today, it's actually quite normal for me to act in an animated and intensely passionate way at times. But back then, however, if I had been surrounded by people who could help guide me through the withdrawal and teach me how to prioritize getting sleep, by people who were curious instead of afraid, I may have been able to get through this without the need for hospitalization. That maybe if I and the people around me could have been helped to see that there was some significance in what I was proclaiming, that I could actually do something meaningful in the world, something with impact, something with power to affect change. Was that so crazy? Or did it come true? I had what was labeled as a manic episode, more evidence for my illness. Yes, I had been up for 5 days without sleep. I guarantee you, anyone in this room who stays up long enough will go psychotic and manic. It is not an illness, it is a stress response. Maybe they should have asked me why I couldn't sleep. Maybe they should have helped me understand withdrawal effects and learn how to take better care of my sleep. So I had this vision. It would have been incredible if I had been supported. But instead, it became the evidence that I was ill and needed to be hospitalized. I wasn't suicidal. I wasn't starting fires. I wasn't threatening to kill anyone. I wasn't committing crimes. I got really excited about something I figured out. That was it. My mom convinced me to go to an inpatient unit, saying that it would be a safe place for me to get some sleep. After so many days without sleep, I knew I needed it, and so I agreed to go. I was diagnosed with bipolar and psychosis NOS. They wanted to add a mood stabilizer and another antipsychotic. I initially resisted. I didn't want any more medications. I was tired of so many medications, tired of the trial and error. I didn't like how they made me feel. They certainly hadn't helped improve my life. I only kept getting more diagnoses, higher dosages, larger cocktails of psychiatric drugs. Even though I went in voluntarily, they changed it to involuntary. Within the first few days of inpatient, I started to see how little things fit an overall pattern of dehumanizing treatment. I was denied access to my journal and a pencil until I agreed to take the medications. I begged for my hair products that helped me avoid matted hair, but was told no. When I complained that another patient was stealing my underwear and I didn't feel safe because I couldn't lock my door, I was told to hide them better. I was told that they couldn't give me the A&D ointment I was instructed to use on my fresh tattoos so that they'd heal properly. Their reason, I might try to drink it and kill myself. I thought I could reason with the staff to listen to me. Turned out I couldn't. There was a 40-year-old woman who took pity on me. She had been hospitalized many times and showed me the ropes. She helped me understand what to do and what not to do. Just keep my head down. Don't try to argue with the staff. That only makes it worse. Just take the meds and try to make the best out of your time there until they let you go. I learned that if you take the medication, they are more likely to let you go. I learned to submit. I gained 35 pounds in 3 weeks on the new combination of meds. People visited me less and less. I tried to just surrender to my circumstances. Since there was not much to occupy myself with, just the loud TV in the common room, another patient in his 50s told me he could show me some of the handouts he had gotten when he was in an outpatient program, and to come to his room and he will give them to me. I naively followed him into his room, and he immediately forced himself on me. And because I was so heavily medicated, because I had a history of dissociating, I wanted to scream and fight back, but I couldn't. It seemed like forever before the staff finally came in and pulled him off me. But the staff were really rough with me. They looked mad and they violently threw me into my room. I didn't understand. I thought they were saving me, but they looked disappointed. They told me what happened was a symptom of my bipolar, that I was hypersexual. How could they not see that I didn't want this to happen to me? That night, that man was not removed from the floor. His room was right across the hallway from mine. I was scared that he could come into my room at any time. I couldn't lock my door, so I didn't sleep at all that night and came up with a plan of how to get transferred off that ward. The next morning, I told the staff that I tried to kill myself. They asked me how, and I quickly had to come up with an answer. I lied and said the bed sheets. They took me off that ward and onto the suicide watch ward. But before I could enter, they said they had to do a strip search to make sure I didn't have anything on me that could be used to kill myself. I had just been raped, and now they want to strip search me. I wanted to yell, I have been here 3 weeks. What could I possibly have on me that you don't already know that I have? All I have are these pajamas. But I couldn't yell at them. I had to submit. I knew there is no way I am actually going to get helped there. I wanted to get out. 3 days later, I was told that my insurance had run out and I was being discharged. To say the very least, that I had been broken, or more aptly, heartbroken, that I couldn't trust the people that were supposed to help me. What kind of training or clinical gaze makes people lose their humanity or even common sense so much that they witness a rape and think I am so out of my mind that I somehow wanted this to happen to me? That a 22-year-old was trying to seduce a male patient in his 50s in a psychiatric hospital while heavily medicated. After experiencing such dehumanizing treatment, there is no amount of convincing or coercion that could ever make me want to go back voluntarily to a psychiatric hospital. For years, I felt the threat from family members and treatment providers that I would be rehospitalized if I came off my medications or for any other number of reasons. Since there are so many of us who would never want to be involuntarily hospitalized, I have spent my life trying to create alternatives to any forced treatment. There is a problem with the design of what we call care. We always need to look at the design when we're not getting the outcomes we want and refrain from blaming it on the patient when they refuse our services. We must consider the possibility of iatrogenic harm, harm that is caused by the treatment. My refusal to seek treatment was called a lack of insight. This is an incredibly dangerous and offensive clinical trope that has been gaining traction over the last decade. There is even an unproven myth, often presented as fact, similar to the rise and fall of the chemical imbalance theory, called anosognosia, something that is studied in brain injuries but is being falsely attributed to mental illness. That someone lacks the insight into their condition, that they are so ill that they do not know that they are ill, and that this is used as an explanation for why people refuse medications and conventional treatments. This idea of lack of insight is dangerous because it assumes that people do not know what is best for them and that they can be ignored and another person gets to decide what is best for that person. Anosognosia is a loophole, a trap door, an exception that lets in one group of powerful people to step on a group of vulnerable people. What is it truly? The idea that a person has a lack of insight arises between two people who are having a disagreement. Two different perspectives, different ideas about what is and is not helpful. Humans have had disagreements over belief systems for a very long time. If we look at how opposing belief systems have contributed to the amount of violence and oppression, from arguments at a family dinner table to countless genocides and brutalities on this planet, we know that there is no easy solution to proving who holds the truth. Psychosis is a disagreement over what is reality. Psychosis is often a disagreement over belief systems. If you tell the person that what they are experiencing is not real, like hearing voices is just an auditory hallucination, it doesn't make their experience go away. You just become a person they cannot talk to about what is really going on. It simply leaves them to be alone with their experience. By a show of hands, has anyone here ever had a song stuck in your head? Well, that's an auditory experience that no one else can hear. We all can experience some degree of auditory hallucination. The research by Rome and Escher that spawned the International Hearing Voices movement showed that many people who hear voices are managing the voice hearing experience without any need for psychiatric interventions. And that hearing voices is not a sign that there is something inherently wrong with you that needs to be eradicated. And actually, across different cultures, voice hearing can be seen as a normal part of human experience. Here's a fantastic study of the Maori indigenous people of New Zealand and how what gets labeled as psychosis by Western doctors is actually understood and held well within their spiritual beliefs. I also recommend the documentary Crazy Wise for anyone who hasn't seen it. Courtney Harding's landmark study of deinstitutionalization and recovery from schizophrenia was a 32-year longitudinal study of 269 back ward patients released from the Vermont State Hospital. They were considered the most severe of all the patients. Her study showed that half to 2/3 of people recovered or improved significantly. In a paper in 1994, Harding combats the 7 myths about schizophrenia, including the myth that once a schizophrenic, always a schizophrenic, in comparing longitudinal studies from around the world. She states that the longer investigators followed an identified intact cohort, whether programs were in or out of treatment, the more pronounced the picture of increasing heterogeneity and improvement in function. These studies have consistently found that half to 2/3 of patients significantly improved or recovered, including some cohorts of very chronic cases. The universal criteria for recovery, what Harding used in comparing these studies, have been defined as no current signs and symptoms of any mental illness, no current medications, working, relating well to friends and family, integrated into the community, and behaving in such a way as to not being able to detect having ever been hospitalized for any kind of psychiatric problems. And with respect to another myth that patients must be on medications all of their lives, she states, when analyzing the results from the long-term studies, it was clear that a surprising number, at least 25 to 50%, were completely off their medications, suffered no further signs or symptoms of schizophrenia, and were functioning well. The authors go on to state that the long-term studies found that more subjects than not eventually discovered through either trial, error, or time that they were able to function without medication later on. I do wonder how high these percentages could be if people were actually supported in withdrawing from psychiatric drugs. Even though this paper came out almost 30 years ago, these myths still persist today. To many people, those myths are still forced upon them as reality. What are we doing that might be preventing recovery? That might even be causing harm? As Harding's work suggests, and a lot of other studies, given time, people do better. Change people's expectations that there needs to be a quick fix. A quick fix might have worse outcomes for the long term. People do not always need to be medicated right away, and they do not need to remain on high dosages for the long term. Medication can be helpful to some people. I work with many people who decide to take medication. As prescribers, though, please consider that even if your intention is to put a person on something only for a short period of time, if you are not also the one to help them come off, then they may end up never finding another psychiatrist who will let them withdraw. People can and do withdraw from medications. They just might need support for how to do it with the least amount of harm. Whether to take or not take medications should always be a choice, and that in order to uphold true informed consent, other options must also be presented, as well as educating people that withdrawal can be very challenging. People need this information to make the best decisions for themselves. It is unethical to present only one option as truth. That's actually coercion. That medication is the only path is false. This is not the only way that people can and do get better. I never went back to the psychiatrist who hospitalized me. He has no idea how I am doing now or that how my life has turned out. He has no idea that I came off all psychiatric drugs and am doing well. So most psychiatrists don't see the long-term picture that people can do well off of medications. But for those psychiatrists that do understand this, there is a bit of a gold rush right now in withdrawal, as those psychiatrists who specialize in deprescribing take advantage of people's desperation by charging higher niche rates. As the pharmaceutical industry has no financial incentive to research how people can better discontinue taking psychiatric drugs, most of the knowledge base has come from psych survivors, those of us who have actually successfully gone through withdrawal. There are a lot of free resources for people because the field of psychiatry has traditionally not supported people in their choice to no longer take medications. So people have had to figure out how to do it on their own. Really understanding withdrawal and customizing it is important to help avoid common mistakes, even by well-meaning prescribers, of tapering too fast or too slow. Here are some valuable resources to help educate. And if you find them helpful to your work, please give back to the psych survivors who created them. There are many people who come off because they want to undo the damage they feel these drugs have caused them. And so I work alongside psychiatrists who do the deprescribing, and I work directly with the individuals to help them with everything else around withdrawal that the psychiatrist usually does not. Managing their sleep, the emotional aspect, repairing relationships, getting their feet back under them, as well as working through the feelings of anger at the years stolen away by psychiatric medications. I also help them and their support network understand non-med, non-hospital approaches for dealing with a crisis. So if things get rough, they have another plan. Every provider needs to recognize the potential for damage to a client's existing relationships when providers push supporters to force or coerce their loved one to agree to treatment they do not want. Many parents take follow the doctor's orders very, very seriously. This creates a contempt for disobedience and an incredibly painful power struggle that destroys many family relationships. Help should never come at the expense of existing support relationships. Providing non-hierarchical dialogues that avoid power struggles could dramatically change treatment instead. If you want to learn a bit more about this, look into the open dialogue approach. In open dialogue, the person who is at the center of concern, who in conventional approaches is normally told they have a lack of insight because of their diagnosis and is shut down and excluded from treatment team decisions. In open dialogue, that person is a necessary part of the conversation around decision-making, not to be forced or coerced, but to be listened to so that everyone can learn from their perspective. The provider who takes the time and makes the effort to help people communicate as equals instead of fighting out the power struggle over whose belief system is truth has the potential to create true healing. Why are those diagnosed with psychosis the most heavily medicated? Those hearing voices or seeing visions the most stigmatized, the most feared? Courtney Harding also discussed an idea called the clinician's illusion. The illusion occurs when clinicians repeatedly see the few most severely ill in their caseloads as typical, when in fact, such patients represent a small proportion of the actual possible spectrum. Here's the Fool card, illustrated by Pamela Coleman Smith from the Smith-Waite Tarot deck. Upon first glance, we notice that this seemingly carefree person is on an adventure, so caught up in their own world that they do not see that they are about to step off a dangerous cliff, and the dog barking to get their attention seems to go unnoticed. Thus, the fool is seen as inexperienced, naive, and foolish. The fool has also been viewed as the wandering lunatic, the one who can't keep it together like everyone else. But the fool can be so much more. The fool can be the court jester who often speaks the unspeakable truth. The one who can get close enough to royalty to speak truth to power. The fool can also be the one with divine madness, the one whose messages disrupt the social order, the belief system of the majority. As with all tarot cards, and I'll also add people for that matter, there are always more than one interpretation. See, now us as outside observers can only see one tiny fraction of what is going on here. We only see this brief moment. We do not know for sure that he is actually in mid-step, or that he has paused to reflect and take in his surroundings with awe. We cannot even be certain that there is a dangerous cliff in front of him. It could simply be a very safe step down to the next ledge. We do not know that before this moment, he wasn't actually keenly aware and knows exactly where he is headed next. We do not know his future. It could be that this folly is what initiates his growth and discovery. Maybe his fall doesn't mean death, or that something bad is about to happen. Maybe it is the start of his journey, and that if he had been afraid of his next step, he would have missed his potential destiny. This is how we can hold crisis as a potentially transformative experience in the life of the person in front of us. There is always a possibility that it could provide some meaning and purpose to the person's life, maybe even a spiritual awakening, or that could be much needed growth and learning that sparks a change in how they want to live their life. Growth is not usually a blissful experience. From the outside looking in, and even for the person going through it, it can look very painful. And of course, our first instinct is to try to stop the pain and discomfort at any cost. But this isn't always the best response for the long-term outcome. And if we could instead adopt a treatment design that holds true to the words of Robert Frost, the best way out is always through. So what was the meaning of life that I discovered? What was it that I was telling everyone was a pathway forward for humans? What was so dangerous that I needed to be forcibly institutionalized? Simply, it was that we as humans have basic human needs. That these are food, water, shelter, yes, but we also have other basic human needs. That we need to have a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. That we need to have love and attention and affection. that we need to have self-esteem, that our society is currently organized to deprive us of these basic human needs, that instead we are taught to compete for survival, that we cannot be interdependent, that instead, if we could redesign society to understand that through meeting the basic needs of all people, that we could achieve our full potential as individuals and as a species. That the way forward is not through division. The way forward is a restoration of humanity. If you really ask those of us who were struck with quote unquote madness about the content of our messages, there is often a common theme of somehow wanting to save the world. That those who are mad may represent transcendence, being outside the social order and able to see beyond it. And it is not uncommon that the savior is viewed first and foremost as a mad person or a fool. I, like many people who go into the helping profession, come to this work as a wounded healer, meaning that I have personal lived experiences that cannot be taught in an academic setting. It was by personally going through the mental health system that I learned what needed to change, that sparked my activism and ignited the fire for why I wanted to help others. I am not alone in this. There is a large international social movement of psychiatric survivors, people subjected to the human rights violations at the hands of the mental health system. This movement has had many different names: the Consumer Survivor Ex-Patient Movement, or CSX for short, the MAD movement, the peer movement, the recovery movement, MAD Pride, or simply, to many of us, it's just called the movement. It has been co-opted, subdued, and perceived as a threat. We've been ignored or silenced because of our anger. Movement activists of the past were much more vocal in their anger and criticism of psychiatry. Protests at the APA, slogans like "you bet your ass we're paranoid," one only needs to look at the free online archives of Madness Network News to see how angry people have been for decades. Judy Chamberlain's book, On Our Own, is a foundational understanding of the psychiatric survivor movement and why people like me have been advocating for self-help and help that is designed and even delivered by those with personal lived experience. We have a level of empathy and shared understanding that can only be learned by going through it yourself. Years of activism to create alternatives like peer support, peer-run drop-in centers, and peer respites have been systematically underfunded or defunded completely. There have been long-standing tensions in the family member movement. Originally formed, the family member movement formed as a response to psychiatry's initial theories of psychosis as being caused by the family, as in the schizophrenic mother. The family member movement has often been deeply rooted in the medical model, embracing the idea that mental illness is biologically based. But this movement is run by the agendas of NAMI, the Treatment Advocacy Center, and historically funded by the pharmaceutical industry. The providers have historically also had their own differing perspectives. The medical model, the biopsychosocial model, the power threat meaning model, trauma, is it nature or nurture? Is it body or mind? The providers have been aligning with the family members to force or coerce the patients to do what the providers think is a treatment pathway. The patients resist and are ignored or silenced. This makes the patients very angry, and then the family members and providers are offended, frustrated, and at a loss, and feel that force or coercion is the appropriate response. This is where we are at right now. Wow, what a mess. Right here in California, there have been some incredibly alarming trends to make force and coercion much easier. The recent expansion of the criteria for gravely disabled makes it easier to hospitalize more people against their will. The introduction of care courts allows for family members or even a roommate to petition the court to coerce someone with untreated psychosis into treatment through compulsion. Think about the impact. What people's lives are actually going to look like having to go through this process. On the ballot this coming March is Proposition 1. It looks like it will build involuntary housing and more involuntary psychiatric beds by cutting voluntary community services like many peer-run advocacy programs across the state. Many of us in the psychiatric survivor community are against Proposition 1. Putting people on a medication that makes them sleep 18 hours a day will not solve their poverty issues. It will just tranquilize them so that they are not outwardly angry about it. Sweeping the streets of homeless will not make housing more affordable in the Bay Area, or even prevent the new class of working homeless. These are not solutions. They're not even Band-Aids. They are simply out of sight, out of mind. The idea that Prop 1 will help the homeless is a fantasy. It will create more harm. I feel like I am once again trying to sound the alarm. This time, I really hope people are listening. I think the one place that we all agree, family members, psych survivors, most every provider I have ever talked to, and even those who are compliant with treatment, the one place we definitely all agree is that the system is problematic. We have not exhausted the alternatives that we can develop. I'm not saying we don't need places for people to go. I 100% support voluntary sleep centers, psychosis sanctuaries like Soteria House, Diabasis, I-Ward, the R.D. Lang houses, approaches for changing one's relationship to distressing voices from the Hearing Voices Network. Allow for freakout rooms, a place where it is okay to yell and express anger and you won't get restrained or injected and put in solitary or jail. Med-free hospitals or other community-based programs that can support withdrawal. Communities that understand crisis, where a person can be supported to give them time to get through it. We could design any of these things. We need to ask people why they are non-compliant. We have to acknowledge the anger of those that feel harmed by this system. It is not a lack of insight, it is trauma. Trauma caused by the treatment. Force or coercion is not the answer, but the answer is understanding why people feel this way and designing a different kind of care. So I'll circle back to that UCSD grand rounds I attended. I did my best to explain to them what I thought was going on with me. What I had discovered was the meaning of life and why I needed to tell people about it. I said, it doesn't seem crazy to me. It actually makes a lot of sense that we all have similar basic needs as humans. And why can't we agree to create a world that understands that? We falsely believe that there is scarcity when we actually know that there is waste and excess. I said I wanted them to remove my diagnoses of bipolar and psychosis. I felt it harmed my credibility. They decided not to remove my diagnoses. But one of the graduate students there then raised his hand and asked me if I had ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. No, I hadn't. How much of my life would be different if instead of how I was treated in the psychiatric hospital, someone had instead shown me this chart and just sat down and talked to me about one of the most famous theories of psychology in the human potential movement. Most anyone who has ever taken a Psychology 101 course could have had this discussion with me. Every single person that worked at that hospital absolutely had the background to have this discussion. But not one of them felt it was important to listen to the content of what I was saying. They thought they knew what was best for me. They thought they were helping me. They really had it wrong. My mom was told at the NAMI family support groups that I simply lacked insight, and my only hope for getting better was through medication. In the handout she was given, there was actually one for tips for how to bend the truth to providers or police in order to get me hospitalized against my will. Thank goodness my mom never did that. But how she was educated and then what she pushed me to do deeply impacted our relationship. It's really sad that I felt I had to cut off my relationship with my family for many years in order to prove to everyone that I could find another way. They now see what I was trying to say back then and feel duped by all the messages they were told about what was going on with me and what my life would look like and what I needed to do. No one person holds the ultimate truth. There is always a bigger picture. There is a purpose to different perspectives. There is a purpose to those that we think of as fools. It stretches us to grow, to see beyond our own narrative, to learn from our own foolishness. Those who actually lack insight are those who do not try to see from another's perspective. Do not try to understand the context or bigger picture of what is going on for a person in their life. Those who simply reduce everything into these symptoms mean this, thus the person must do this. Psychosis means that a person must take medications. This is not truth. I work with people in psychosis all the time who do not take medications and who want to avoid psychiatric hospitalization. You have to take the time to listen, to truly understand the content and the context in order to try to understand the meaning of what someone is saying and how it applies to them, to those around them, and to their community. Many clinicians consult me on some of their most puzzling clients. Individuals and families find their way to me, usually when they feel failed by everything else. One of the things that makes me effective is that I am super empathic. I can feel into what it is like to be them. And so often what they are saying, what they are going through makes sense to me. If you put yourself in their shoes, you can see how anger might really be frustration over some unmet need in their life. So is it mind? Is it the body? Or is it spirit? I believe it is important to work with all three. You see, that spark of resistance in me was my soul. My spirit knew that I had a different destiny than the one the mental health system had laid out for me. To live at home with my mom, over-medicated and on the pathway to drooling and obesity? No. And maybe I don't want to be president anymore, but I still do want to live in a more caring and compassionate world. One where we see and embrace each other's humanity. Thank you. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We're happy to stick around for a little bit longer.
Thank you so much for such a comprehensive, rich, expert talk. Thank you. My question to you is about how to help families, right? So you talked about your experience at home, and I wonder about your family being given messages that you needed to be hospitalized, and then finding you not bathing or not eating or not sleeping. What could we tell families around how to be effective during that time of crisis without telling them to send their kid to the ER?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. A lot of my work is with families, and helping them, because in order to avoid psychiatric hospitalization, you really do need to work with the support network. And most of the people I see that get hospitalized is because the people around them are tired. They're exhausted. They need to go to work. They can't deal with this person being up 24 hours a day, where they feel that they have to, watch them. And so it's really exhausting. And families, even from the time of deinstitutionalization, it really put a lot of expectation on the families. We didn't create the community support, and it puts this expectation that families need to not only feel like they have to financially support their loved one, but then also take time off of work to be the primary caretakers. How do you balance that? And so families are exhausted, and they're looking at the professionals like, you guys are paid to help people like this. I'm not an expert. You guys are the expert. Why don't you help? And so they're trying to push their loved one onto the mental health field, understandably. And so a lot of it is I work with families on how to prioritize their own boundaries, their own sense of, taking care of themselves, the oxygen mask, that, the parents, they do need to be able to go to work so that they're not also, we don't want everybody to start drowning basically and being struggling, So one of the things is there a bigger view of how they could support the individual in shifts, finding other people that can come in so that mom and dad can get a break? Is there even working with mom and dad on some of the need to always be there? Like, so, there's sometimes this expectation, well, I've got to prevent them from, doing XYZ, and so then maybe there's not always that expectation that is actually needed. So I really work with the families on what to increase their bandwidth for supporting what is going on, because it is an intensity level that, is alarming. So I work with a lot of people on their fear, the fear of the worst that could happen, and it is a fear. And so we look at, well, just because XYZ has happened in the past doesn't mean that that's going to happen this time. We're doing things differently this time. We have different avenues. Here's, the resource of the peer respite that they could go to instead of a psychiatric hospital. Here's, other things that they could do. Now they know that they need to get sleep. Here's some other ways that they can learn how to prioritize getting sleep. I tend to find if you calm down the whole crisis energy that everybody's, just like this, if you start to calm it all down, the situation just starts to naturally get a little bit better. The person starts to be able to potentially go to sleep, so really I work with like create your home environment that you're all understanding this person needs to sleep. So mom, don't be standing right in their room, asking them questions all the time. Just let them, you make your own dinner and relax and just let them, relax over there. So
I have one quick comment and one question. The comment is that I think, you brought up, for example, open dialogue, which comes out of Finland. And one of the things I often think about in these conversations is that, there's a lot of emphasis placed on the role psychiatry as a profession has played in this dynamic, but which I don't think is unfair, but I just think it's important to point out too that there's a lot of structural issues in our society that play into this. The lack of a social safety net that catches people, the healthcare system that incentivizes care in certain ways and doesn't pay for certain things. So you kind of touched on those, but I just think to me, it's very important, and it's not to like deflect blame from the field of psychiatry for where we failed, but to also point out that we live in a society that is deeply dysfunctional on a structural level and doesn't create the space for the kinds of systems that I think we need to imagine. And so that's my comment. My question, one of the places I always struggle with in these conversations, I really liked your point about the I forget the term you used, but the sort of bias that arises when you work with only the most severe cases. I happen to work in a jail, which is a very challenging place for around many of these issues, because I do work with people who sometimes it was because of their symptoms, sometimes it was incidental, but have wound up in situations that are very, very serious, including on occasion violence and so forth. So my question to you is, and I don't want, at the risk of overemphasizing a small minority, I do wonder what your thoughts are on how to handle these cases where there really truly are safety concerns, violence or self-injury. What do we do if not apply? Because my fear is that there ultimately will be coercion. If it's not coming from the mental health field, it'll come from the legal system and the carceral system. So I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's why I bring up the examples. And of course, I 100% agree with you. I did not have enough time to really lay out what are our actual issues, which I do see as our society and how it's designed, and that a lot of what we're dealing with is poverty, and we are not addressing that. We are not addressing that the income is way at, the few at the top, and that this is the result of, a huge amount of inequality and people not having access to meet their basic human needs. And a lot of the anger is around frustration around this. It's powerlessness to change anything and to get your needs met. So, yes, my dream is that we could change how we, are structuring our society to really understand this. And then the psychosis sanctuaries that I pointed out, like Soteria, Diabasis, I Ward, the R.D. Lang houses. This was another kind of approach for, instead of psych hospitals, instead of early psychosis programs, this was the approach that we had, 3 of these houses right here in the Bay Area, actually 4. But they got systematically shut down because of the rise of the pharmaceutical industry. And but the way that they worked with violence, basically. So it's not to say that people won't get violent, ever, but it's how do you de-escalate these situations in a way that you don't use, just rely on force and medication to de-escalate. And so there are ways, if you really start to listen to the person, if you really start to provide an avenue, why I said the freak out rooms, because to understand that if you allow somebody to scream and yell, Most of our environments, we don't allow that because we got to keep the peace for everyone else. And it makes everybody very uncomfortable to be around pure anger. You know, everybody gets very afraid naturally. But if we can allow somebody, we can create the space, you know, that they can be able to express anger. We have these things that, you know, people pay to go to, like destruction rooms, you know, here. And we understand that people have, you know, pent up anger that they want to express. And when you move through it, often what's behind the anger is a lot of sadness. And so if you can support the person to move the emotion of anger, move it out and move it through, you can go to the next level, which is then working with them through the sadness. And often that's a way to hold space. Of course, you know, in I ward, there's still a few people alive that worked. So Michael Cornwall and Meg Whitaker Green, they've been, you know, working mental health for many, many years, but they both worked at I ward. And so, you know, they're very much available to talk about how they worked with people, because it was full-blown psychosis, zero medications at all. And so people would go into J ward. This is in Contra Costa County. The psych hospital is called J ward. They would go into J ward in full-blown crisis. They were given a choice. Do you want to remain in J ward and, you know, be on the psych unit? Or here's an option of I ward that you could go to. It's an unlocked facility. For many years, it was unlocked. And they had that choice, you know, and so people would go directly, like he walked over there that day in full-blown crisis. And the way it was is like this milieu therapy person gravitates to whoever they feel that they want to talk to. Everyone's just kind of available, holding space. And then that's who you kind of work with, you know, and it's just a different way of designing, you know, treatment and care. It's just the openness, the availability to have conversations, go with things where you're not responding with a lot of fear or we got to control this situation. Instead, you're open to what is happening, and that helps the person to feel seen and heard so much that they actually don't have to yell at you to try to get you to hear them. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.